And I'll mute all. And it's good to see everyone today. And as the weather starts to change, I think 70 degrees is supposed to be the high today, but then 30 something tomorrow. So we'll see. One last gasp, hopefully, for winter. Paul's coming in, and then, okay. So our portion today is VaYakhel, the second to last portion in the book of Exodus. It begins on page 552 in Eitz Chaim. It's chapter 35. Just 1 second, one more person coming in. Chapter 35 of the book of Exodus. Again, 552 in the Eitz Chaim. It's good to see everyone. Let me say the blessing for Torah study before we dig right in. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So before we actually get started with VaYakhel, I remember that a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about theology, I mentioned a book that came out recently, which is a newer explanation of different versions of Jewish theology out there. And I couldn't find the book on my shelf, but I found it. It's called, this is the name, Jewish Theology in Our Time. And then it says, a new generation explores the foundations and future of Jewish belief. So this is edited by Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove, who has a PhD and is the rabbi of Park Avenue Synagogue. And I said this was edited recently. It's already 12 years old, this book. But theology is eternal, so it doesn't matter that it's 12 years old. It's published by Jewish Lights, in case you're looking for it. If you Google it or just go on Amazon, if you're interested, it's short articles about different ideas of different takes on what is God and how we are supposed to believe in God. So it's a easy read. You can read like one chapter at a time, and it's not meant for scholars. So meaning there's not a lot of footnotes and not a lot of fancy words. So it should, the layman should be able to understand it. Okay, so VaYakhel is, like I said, it's the second to last portion of the book of Exodus. Often it is combined with the last one, Pekudei, to make for a longer portion, but because this is a leap year in the Jewish calendar, meaning that an extra month is added to the calendar to ensure that the holidays still fall when they're supposed to fall. So Passover in April, but a little bit later in April than it usually is this coming year. But that's why the portions that are doubled are usually doubled, are not doubled this year. So this is the first of two portions that tell us how the Israelites followed through on the design that was presented in the two portions ago, in the portions Teruma and the portion Titzaveh. So it raises a couple of questions. Namely, why does the Torah need to waste space in telling us how the Israelites followed through on the commandment? In other words, we could have had just a couple of sentences saying Moses appointed Bezalel, as he did in last week's portion, to begin the work of construction, to get the skilled workers in place to follow through on construction and weaving all of the material for the Mishkan. So you could have had a paragraph to say everything was followed through on. Why do you need 2 whole portions to describe in every detail how each and every item was actually constructed and made? So that's one question. The second question is, when exactly within the chronology presented was the tabernacle built? So we had the incident of the golden calf, that terrible incident happened, we read about last week in the portion Kitisa. So when did the golden calf take place? When did the construction of the tabernacle take place? Because from the portion Mishpatim, a few portions back, that's 4 portions ago, right? Yes, Kitisa last week, Tetzaveh the week before, Truma the week before, Mishpatim the week before. So 4 portions ago, we had the portion Mishpatim, in which we were told what is the civil law that the people are supposed to follow. And then immediately on the heels of Mishpatim were the portions Truma Tetzaveh about the building of the Mishkan. So you have law, that is the spirituality of our lives, our day-to-day lives, how we are supposed to live our lives every single day, to how we're supposed to worship God every single day in the building of the Mishkan. So that makes sense. And then we're interrupted with the golden calf, which seems to take place right after Moses comes down the mountain, which seems to have been described in the portion Mishpatim, that Moses is there on the mountain for 40 days to hear and learn Torah. Then Truma Tetzaveh, the design of the Mishkan and the vestments, then Kitisa, the golden calf, and then VaYakhel Pekude. So we would think that Truma Tetzaveh should come after Kitisa. So it's just a question about how this all was written. So let's read the first few sentences of VaYakhel, and then we'll dive in below the line on 552. Okay, so VaYakhel Moshe, Moses gathered at Kol Adat B'nai Yisrael, the whole community of Israel. Adat B'nai Yisrael. So Adat, sometimes it's just Adat Yisrael, not Adat B'nai Yisrael. And the way I'm pronouncing it is is the modern Hebrew way of pronouncing it. If I pronounce the taf that doesn't have the dot in it, in the older way, it would be Adas Yisrael, which leads to some names of synagogues, Adas Israel downtown, right? Or Adath Israel in Philadelphia. So all based on this word, Adat B'nai Yisrael, the community of Israel. Vayomer Alehem, and Moses said to them, Eile hadvarim, these are the things, or the words, depends, either way, Asher tziva Adonai, that God commanded la'asototam, to do them, or to follow them. Sheshet yamim te'aseh melacha, 6 days you should do work. Uvayom hashvi'i, and on the 7th day, yiyeh lachem kodesh, Shabbat Shabbaton l'Adonai. And on the 7th day, it should be for you holy, a Shabbat of a Sabbath of Sabbaths, or a sabbatical, or it says here, Sabbath of complete rest for God. Kol ha'osevo mlacha, whoever does work on it on the 7th day, yumat, shall be put to death. We're going to look at that shortly. Lo tiva'aru esh, don't burn fire, or don't keep a fire burning. Bechol, or don't actively keep a fire burning. Bechol moshvotechem, in all of your dwelling places, bayom haShabbat, on the Sabbath day. So this is one of 2 kinds of work specifically that the Torah tells us is forbidden on Shabbat. It says in verse 2, don't do work. It says here, don't actively maintain a fire. It says don't kindle a fire. I would say, yeah, don't kindle or don't actively maintain a fire. So that's one. And later in the book of Numbers, we'll learn another type of work that is carrying, gathering sticks. Gathering sticks is forbidden on Shabbat too. So those two are specified. Everything else that we're restricted from is in the broad phrasing of don't do work. Okay. Verse 4, Vayomer Moshe, Moses said, El kol adat b'nei Yisrael, to the entire community of Israel, Lamor, saying, Zeh hadavar, this is the thing, that Asher tziva Adonai Lamor, that God commanded, saying, Kechu me'itchem truma l'Adonai, take from you an offering to God, kol nadiv libo, whoever whose heart is so moves him or is so willing, Yevieha will bring the truma et trumat Adonai, the truma of God, zahav v'chesef unechoshet, gold or silver or copper. Okay, and then it goes on and on and on to remind us of what we were told in the portion truma. Okay, so a couple things here that the below the line commentary is going to focus on. One is when actually this commandment took place chronologically. Was it before the golden calf? Was it after the golden calf? Also about the commandment to observe Shabbat. Anyone who violates Shabbat should be put to death. There's comment on that as well. And then also this repetition of every specific detail that was given in Truma and Tetzaveh, repeated here in VaYakhel, and in next week's portion, Pekudei. So let's look below the line. This relatively brief parsha is almost entirely a recapitulation of the instructions for fashioning the tabernacle and its furnishings. This is puzzling to commentators who are accustomed to the Torah being sparing in its use of words, right? So what that means is that throughout rabbinic literature, we're told that the Torah does not waste words. But at the same time, there's also a rabbinic concept that Dibra Torah Bilashon B'nei Adam, that the Torah was spoken in the language of human beings. So sometimes the rabbis recognize words have to be repeated or wasted or are redundant because that's just how people speak. Okay, so that for the rabbis, the words of the Torah are very important for deriving Jewish law. And if a word is repeated in the Torah, then that repetition can teach us a new law. You know, so in the Daf Yomi cycle, we're in the tractate Chagiga, which describes the festival sacrifice. And some things about the festival sacrifice, when it's supposed to be brought, etc., are learned from how words are used in the Torah, how a word in one place is used in the same place, is used in a different place, or a topic that is brought up one place is brought up again in another place. And that repetition or the similar use of words are used by the rabbis to derive Jewish law. Okay, so that when the Torah then is sparse in words, then the rabbis have to use these words intentionally in order to derive Jewish law. Okay, so that when something is repeated, it raises a red flag for the rabbis to say, something important must be going on here if God wanted to say the same thing again. So one commentator, so we're on the sixth line below the line on 552 in the Eitz Chaim, one commentator suggests that God so loved the idea of having a permanent home amid the Israelites that the details were repeated, right? So God just loved this idea and just loved how the people were following through on the commandment. So God decided to say it all over again, just to show how much God loved the people of Israel. Another suggests that the earlier version of the instructions represents God's commands, reflecting the enthusiasm descending from on high for this link for God, with God, and that this version represents Israel's carrying out those commands, showing the corresponding enthusiasm welling up from below, right? So you have enthusiasm on both parts, God's enthusiasm and the people's enthusiasm to follow through. Okay, so it's here in the Torah, repeated to highlight the spiritual enthusiasm of the people. And perhaps to highlight every time we read this section that we should have that enthusiasm whenever we come to synagogue, whenever we try to have an encounter with God. Okay, so now we get to the chronology. There is a tradition that the sin of the golden calf and God's forgiving the people happened on Yom Kippur, the great annual day of forgiveness and reconciliation. Okay, so that's just rabbinic tradition. There is a separate rabbinic work known as Seder Olam, the order of the world, in which there's a chronology, like in what year was the world created, and in what year was Adam fashioned, what year was Eve fashioned, when was Canaan, when were Cain and Abel born, et cetera, all the way through. This rabbinic work, Seder Olam, suggests that the golden calf occurred on Yom Kippur. It doesn't say that in the Torah. It just, that's what the rabbis say. Rashi says that himself. The Midrash says this, all based on that. So on Yom Kippur, and in the Yom Kippur liturgy that we recite in the Machzor, phrases from the Torah portion, Kitisa, are incorporated into the liturgy that day to highlight, to remind us, oh, this is from the portion Kitisa. That's from the section of the golden calf. We're reading this on Yom Kippur. Golden calf might have happened on Yom Kippur. Okay, so rabbis say it happened on Yom Kippur. Then they put into the liturgy the verses from the Torah portion into the Yom Kippur liturgy to reinforce the message that it happened on Yom Kippur. Okay, based on that tradition, Rashi sees the events of VaYakhel, that is starting to build the Mishkan, taking place on the day after Yom Kippur. So on the 11th of Tishrei, in that year, that's when VaYakhel took place. Moses urges the people to translate their sense of renewed relationship with God, of having been cleansed and forgiven, into action by keeping Shabbat and by contributing to the fashioning of the tabernacle. So after the golden calf, after the people have been forgiven, it's the next day. How the people of Israel are going to show that they appreciate being forgiven by observing Shabbat every week and by building the Mishkan. Okay, so that's the rabbinic idea. And then why is it out of place? Then why didn't they put Truma and Tetzaveh after Kitisa, right? So why didn't they reorganize it that way? Well, Ein Mukdam U'Me'uchar b'Torah. There's no early or late in the Torah. It just is how it is, and we can figure out the chronology for ourselves. Okay, God didn't care about chronology. We do. So we can put it in the so-called right order then. Okay, so now there's a comment on the word VaYakhel that here below the line that says it's a word that's used only for gathering people. So if you gather sheep, or if you gather in your harvest, those would be different words, right? So Sukkot, for example, is the fall harvest festival. So it's Chag HaAsif, right? Gathering is used, asif, lehasif, to gather in, but not this word, VaYakhel. Kahal is congregation, kihila, congregation. So that's for people, gathering people. Okay, so now there's a comment here about the whole Israelite community. So the commandment to build the tabernacle was given to the entire community of Israel. Men, women, children, old, young, Kohen, Levi, Israelite, all the people together were given this commandment. So what does the commentary say? This is to restore the sense of unity and shared purpose that had existed at Mount Sinai before the incident of the golden calf introduced divisiveness and disillusionment. So remember, after the golden calf, not everybody was singing and dancing around the golden calf. And after that incident, when Moses came down, the tribe of Levi volunteered to kill those 3,000 people who are worshiping the calf. So that civil war that ensued, right, the tribe of Levi against all the people who were singing and dancing, could have fractured the community. So the community needed to be brought back together. And this Kol Adat B'nai Israel highlights that the people, after they were forgiven by God, were brought back together. Or another idea, rabbinic tradition has it that the second temple was destroyed because of baseless hatred of one Jew for another. Moses gathers the people together for the enterprise of establishing the sanctuary so that it will rest on a base of Jewish unity, right? So that the sanctuary, in order for it to survive and be an eternal reminder of the unity of the Jewish community, then the people had to be united. Every Jew depends on fellow Jews for the energy, resources, and courage wherewith to be a Jew. From Mordechai Kaplan, right? We need to feel part of the Jewish community, and that gives us our strength, that gives us our spiritual energy. And so the idea also of looking forward to the day when the temple will be rebuilt is not necessarily looking forward to the physical space itself or the sacrifices themselves being restored, but also to the spiritual idea of what the temple represents, the idea of the unity of the Jewish community. So now there's also a comment here about why is it that if you violate any aspect of Shabbat, you should be put to death, right? And this isn't just here. In other places, when the commandment for Shabbat is presented, we have the law of execution associated with it. I think back in Kitisa, near the beginning of last week's portion, you have it there too in that commandment when Shabbat is brought there too. So how do we understand this? Why is if Shabbat is supposed to be this time of spiritual rejuvenation, why does execution have to be associated with it? So, shall be put to death. One commentator would not take these words literally. He understood them to mean that those who ignore Shabbat forfeit their souls. That is, they become dead to the spiritual dimension of life. So according to this Rabbi Eibschutz, the idea is a spiritual idea, a spiritual death that one would experience if one was not observing Shabbat, right? So it's not meant to be taken literally. Eibschutz says It's rather meant to be taken spiritually and figuratively. And there is that beauty to the performance of Shabbat. Anybody who experiences the beauty of Shabbat itself knows that if you don't try to experience that after Shabbat, there's just something missing from your life. It's a regular weekday, and regular weekday, as we know, especially if we're on social media, which really should not be done on Shabbat. Being on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all those things, TikTok, Snapchat, all these things just raise our blood pressure when we're involved with them. And you feel it raises certainly social anxiety of the youth. And so that alone should be reason at least one day a week to have vacation from it. So if you experience that vacation once a week on Shabbat, it's something to try to do every Shabbat. Yes, as Jan is saying, that's right. I mean, there are Jewish thinkers and scholars who have said that just as Shabbat has kept the Jews, just as much as Jews have kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jews, right? So it's absolutely. So now the comment goes on, according to Jewish lore, on Shabbat, a person acquires an additional deeper soul, a neshama yetera, an extra soul. At Shabbat's end, it is taken away to be restored the following Shabbat. A person who makes no distinction between Shabbat and the weekday forfeits that gift. So by not observing Shabbat, you're forfeiting that extra soul, and you're dying in that metaphorical way by not allowing that soul to live within you. Okay, so that's what I wanted to share from here. There's not much else that's below the line for this portion, because a lot of it is it's repetition from 3 weeks ago. So there are just a couple of other brief comments I wanted to share with you. If we turn to page 554, the very bottom of the page, this is a comment on verse 25. So chapter 35, verse 25, which is in the second Aliyah, on 554, it's the bottom of the page, verse 25. V'chol isha chachmat lev biyadeha tavu. And all the skilled women spun with their own hands, vayaviu matveh et ha'techelet ve'et hargaman ve'et holat hashani ve'et hashesh. So, and they brought what they had spun in blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and in fine linen. Okay, so there's a comment about these skilled women. Throughout our history, devoted Jewish women have contributed to Hidur Mitzvah, glorifying a mitzvah, the practice of giving the mitzvot an aesthetically pleasing context in their homes and synagogues through the skilled and creative work of their hands. All right, so just a comment. Again, this is from the 1990s, where egalitarianism was still relatively new within the conservative movement. Right when I entered rabbinical school in 1984, that was the first year that women were allowed in. So when this Chumash came out 10 years or so later, it's still relatively new within the conservative movement of Judaism. So the idea that you have to make a comment like this about skilled women, when today we think that we kind of take this for granted, that men and women were involved in the process of building the Mishkan. But the other idea here of Hidur Mitzvah, of glorifying the mitzvah, enhancing the mitzvah, it's added, it's an element that is associated with a variety of mitzvot, like Shabbat itself. How do we glorify Shabbat? Well, we save, and there are a lot of stories like this in rabbinic literature and in, the shtetl Jewish literature as well, how poor Jews would save up their money so that they would buy something special for their Shabbat dinner table, right? So there's a story of Yosef Mokir Shabbat, which is from the Talmud. This Yosef who valued Shabbat, right? He would again save up his money. It's a long story. There's if you just Google Yosef Mokir Shabbat, you'll see the story that will come up about the pearl that gets lost, swallowed by a fish, and he fishes. He finds that fish that has the pearl in it, and not only does he have fish for his Shabbat table, but he has a gem from which he can sell and make money and live happily ever after. That's essentially the story of Yosef Mokir Shabbat, and there are a whole variety of stories like that about saving your fancy tablecloth, your fancy china and silverware for the Shabbat table. That's all part of Hidur Mitzvah. You can build a sukkah, or you could build a sukkah. So how you build a sukkah is glorifying the mitzvah. You can have a talus, an off-the-rack talus when you walk into shul, or you can buy your own talus to bring with you. And what kind of talus you buy also. There's no end to how much money you should spend for glorifying the mitzvah of talit. The same with lulav and etrog, and that great Israeli movie that came out a number of years ago, Ushpizin, about the poor Jew in Mea Sharim who was given money from the community to support his family, and he uses that money to buy the most expensive etrog around. I won't give away the ending, but it's a whole take on this Hidur Mitzvah. How much should you invest in glorifying the mitzvah versus supporting your family? Right? That's an important ethical question to be asked. But the whole idea of glorifying the mitzvah is applied to a whole variety of things within Jewish tradition. Okay. On 555, below the line, we're told about where it says, we're introduced to Betzalel again. And Betzalel here at the start of the third Aliyah, chapter 35, verse 30, Vayomer Moshe el b'nei Yisrael, Moses said to the children of Israel, Re'u kara Adonai b'shem, see, God has chosen or called by name Betzalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. So this Hur, according to the commentary, is the very Hur that I spoke about this past Shabbat, related to the Hur who we met earlier in Exodus. He's the one with Aaron who held up Moses' arms during the battle with the Amalekites. As long as Moses' arms were raised, the Israelites were defeating the Amalekites. So Hur was one of those who did that. And Hur was among those who went up Mount Sinai with Moses and saw God's heavenly throne there descended on Mount Sinai. But then we never see Hur again. And there's this whole midrash about what happened to Hur related to the golden calf. But here we're just reminded Betzalel was his grandson, and he was chosen to for this special purpose of being the chief artisan, known for his own talents, to also then oversee the construction and design and making of everything necessary for the Mishkan. Okay, and one of two last comments. We're told that God filled him, verse 31 on page 555, chapter 35, verse 31, Vayemale Oto, God filled him, Ruach Elohim, with the Spirit of God, or the Spirit of God was filled in him, Bechochma, with, so I'm going to translate this literally, and then we'll see how the below the line explains it. Bechochma, with wisdom, Bitavuna, with understanding, Uveda'at, with knowledge, Uvechol malacha, and all kinds of craftsmanship. Okay, so now it was translated here, skill, ability, and knowledge. I translated it wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Okay, so below the line explains why. Skill, ability, and knowledge. Rashi defines skill, chokhmah, as what a person learns from others. So chokhmah, wisdom, is what we learn from others. You learn it from a book. A book is written by others or by God, right? So wisdom, chokhmah, is book knowledge or could be apprenticeship in a job. Like, how do you become a blacksmith? You have to apprentice to a blacksmith. That knowledge of how to be a blacksmith could be this kind of chokhmah, okay? And then there's tivunah, which is ability, as a result of one's own insight and experience. So chokhmah and tivunah can go together. There's what you learn from other people, and then putting that to practice with the experience of doing, right? And then there's knowledge, da'at, as divine inspiration. So there's an extra divine inspiration in order to excel at your task. So let me say it this way. So let's say athletic ability, right? I'm average. I think I'm coordinated. I can catch a ball. I can throw a ball. I can throw a frisbee. I'm okay with that, right? I'm not sure if I can hit a golf ball. I'm not too good at that. But I can't play basketball on the level of Michael Jordan. And in fact, not too many people in the history of basketball have been able to play like Michael Jordan. Some might suggest that Michael Jordan's ability is God-given, right? There's only so much one can do to learn how to play basketball and to play basketball. You can keep on practicing no matter what. And no matter what, none of us is going to be as good as Michael Jordan. There's just something about how Michael Jordan was created, his DNA and whatever else went into him, that made him arguably the best player in the history of basketball, right? You can apply that to any other sport. You can apply that to musicians, right? Anybody can learn how to play the violin, but not everybody can be a Yitzhak Perlman, right? Same thing. So this is that related to the 10 Sfirot? Jan is asking. I don't know. I really don't know, because in the mystical terms of Chokhmah, Da'at, and Bina are there among the 3 of the 10 Sfirot. And in mystical terms, I'm not sure how they would be translated related to this. I think the Chokhmah, Tivunah, and Da'at are related to these craftsmanship skills and might be used differently when it comes to Torah scholarship, and it might be used differently when it comes to mystical approach to God. Okay, so the same word could be used in different ways in different circumstances. Okay, so all right, and so that's it for da'at, skill, ability, and knowledge. And then there's just one more brief comment. Okay, here on the next page on 556, chapter 36, we have verse 3. Verse 2. Verse 2. Vayikra Moshe el Betzalel ve'el Oholiav. Moses called Betzalel and Oholiav. We're told Oholiav is his assistant, Betzalel's assistant. Ve'el kol ish chacham lev, and all the other skilled artisans, Asher Natan Adonai Chokhmah Belibo, that God had chosen by granting that Chokhmah. Kol Asher Nesa'o Libo, everyone whose heart was raised up, Lekarva El Hamlacha La'asodata, to start doing the work and get ready to do it. Vayikru Milifnei Moshe, they took from before Moses at Kol HaTrumah all the items that were donated, Asher Heviu B'nei Yisrael Lemelechet Avodat HaKodesh, that the people of Israel brought to be transformed into this sacred work, right? All the gold, silver, all the objects that the people donated, these artisans took, and they continued to bring to them these free will offerings, baboker, in the morning, So it says here, morning after morning. So every day these offerings were brought. It's suggesting, or baboker. Why is the word boker, or this word baboker, repeated? So below the line, morning after morning, the repetition of the word morning is interpreted to mean that the people brought their gifts at dawn's first light, when no one could see them, to emphasize that they were contributing out of love for God with no wish to be recognized for it. Right? So the baboker repeated here, not just to mean every morning people were bringing gifts, but to highlight, according to this commentator, David Shoham, that they brought it at dawn while it was still dark. So people couldn't see each other, and that they were bringing it solely for the spiritual purpose of donating, rather than to be acknowledged. Oh yeah, did you see who came this morning to bring their offering? Do you know who I saw? Like people could be talking over breakfast. Do you know who I saw bring an offering this morning? So-and-so brought their offering this morning. So it could be a source of gossip. And so instead of it being a source of gossip, it's a source of true love to give the donations for the Mishkan. So that's all I had to share with you for VaYakhel today. Any questions, any further questions or comments about this? Right, so we'll see what we have next Wednesday. Well, first, we'll wish safe travels, because by next Wednesday, please God, Paul Tillis and his wife Cheryl are going to be in Morocco on the B'nai Israel congregation trip to Morocco that had been postponed from 2 years ago because of COVID. So hope and pray safe travels, Paul, and go in peace, come back in peace, and enjoy. Looking forward to hearing all about it. But otherwise, we'll be here, and you can watch the recording at your leisure, Paul. We'll be here next Wednesday for next week's Torah study. Have a good day, everybody.
Yasher Koach, Jonah. Enjoy the trip.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.